Facts of U.S. versus Piccinonna of 1981. Case reference, United States versus Piccinonna 682 F2D 580. 5th Sir 1981. Background, Vincent Piccinonna was charged with mail fraud under federal law. The case primarily involved accusations that Piccinonna had engaged in fraudulent activities in connection with insurance claims for stolen boats. Issue, the primary legal question in the case revolved around the admissibility of polygraph or lie detector test result as evidence in federal court. Piccinonna sought to introduce results from a polygraph examination of support his claim of innocence, but the district court ruled the evidence inadmissible. Court's decision. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit upheld the district court's decision, reaffirming that polygraph test results are generally inadmissible in federal courts. The court cited concerns about the reliability of polygraph tests and the potential of mislead or prejudice the jury. Legal significance. U.S. versus Piccinonna is frequently referenced in discussion about the evidentiary value of polygraph test. It reflects the judiciary's long-standing skepticism about the scientific reliability of lie detector results, maintaining the principle that such evidence generally does not meet the standard of admissibility in federal courts.
The case of U.S. versus Piccinonna 1981 represents a crucial example of the Fifth Amendment's double jeopardy clause protects defendants from repeated prosecutions, particularly when prosecutorial misconduct is involved. The Supreme Court's decision in the case underscores the delicate balance between the government's interest in pursuing justice and an individual's rights to a fair trial. The case procedural history. District Court. The initial trial ended in a mistrial due to prosecutorial misconduct. This suggests that the prosecutor engaged in action that violated the defendant's right to fair trial, potentially jeopardizing the integrity of the proceeding. Appellate Court. The government appealed the district court's decision, arguing that a retrial was permissible. This indicates that the government believes that the mistrial did not prelude a second trial, potentially arguing that the misconduct was unintentional or did not significantly impact the trial fairness. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ultimately reviewed the case, signifying the importance of the legal issues at stake and the potential for a precedent-setting decision. The Supreme Court holdings. The Supreme Court found that a retrial in Piccinonna's case would violate the Fifth Amendment's double jeopardy clause. The mean that the court determined that the government could not retry Piccinonna for the same offense because the initial trial had been terminated due to prosecutorial misconduct.
The rationale behind the holding. The court's decision rested on three key points. 1. Intentional prosecutorial misconduct. The court determined that the prosecutorial misconduct was intentional and designed to provoke a mistrial. This implies that the prosecutor's actions were not accidental but rather a deliberate attempt to disrupt the trial and potentially gain an advantage. Number 2. Punishment for exercising rights. The court recognized that allowing a retrial would punish Piccinonna for exercising his rights to object to the misconduct. This underscores the importance of protecting defendants' ability to challenge unfair practices without facing the consequence of repeated prosecutions. Number 3. Double jeopardy protection. The court affirmed that the double jeopardy clause protects against repeated prosecutions. This fundamental principle ensures that individuals are not subjected to multiple trials for the same offense, potentially leading to undue stress, financial burden, and the risk of an unfair outcome. Implications and future considerations. The Piccinonna case serves as a significant precedent for future cases involving prosecutorial misconduct and mistrials. It reinforces the idea that courts must carefully scrutinize the circumstances surrounding a mistrial to ensure that it was not intentionally caused by prosecutorial misconduct. This decision underscores the importance of ethical conduct by prosecutors and the need for courts to hold them accountable for misconduct. Moving forward, courts will need to carefully consider the following factors when determining whether a retrial is permissible after a mistrial caused by prosecutorial misconduct. First, the nature and severity of the misconduct. The more egregious the misconduct, the more likely a retrial will be barred. Second, the prosecutor's intent. Was the misconduct intentional or unintentional? Third, the prejudice to the defendant. Did the misconduct significantly prejudice the defendant's ability to receive a fair trial? Fourth, the availability of alternative remedies. Could the prejudice have been cured by other means, such as cautionary instruction to the jury? The Piccinonna case highlights the importance of ethical conduct by prosecutors and the need for courts to hold them accountable for misconduct. It also reinforces the critical role of the double jeopardy clause in protecting individuals from the potential abuse of prosecutorial power.
Here are the implications of U.S. versus Piccinonna 1981. Judicial implications. Number 1. Double jeopardy protection. Strengthen the Fifth Amendment's double jeopardy clause, preventing repeated prosecution for the same offense. Number 2. Mistrial rulings. Clarify that mistrial due to prosecutorial misconduct bars retrial. Number 3. Judicial discretion. Limited judges' discretion to grant retrials after mistrials. Procedural implications. Number 1. Procedural accountability. Held prosecutors accountable for misconduct, deterring future abuses. Number 2. Trial management. Encourage careful trial management to avoid mistrial. Number 3. Appellate review. Establish stricter appellate review in mistrial rulings. Constitutional implications. Number 1. Fifth Amendment reinforce the double jeopardy clauses constitutional protections. Number 2. Due process upheld defendants' due process rights. Number 3. Separation of powers affirmed judicial oversight of prosecutorial actions. Practical implications. Number 1. Reduce retrials, decrease retrials due to prosecutorial misconduct. Number 2. Improve prosecutorial conduct. Promoted ethical prosecution practices. Number 3. Defendant protections. Enhance safeguards against abusive prosecution tactics. Future cases. U.S. versus Piccinonna influence subsequent cases including Number 1. Oregon versus Kennedy 1982. Number 2. U.S. versus Denetz 1976. Number 3. Arizona versus Washington 1978. This landmark decision has shaped American jurisprudence, ensuring defendants' rights are protected from prosecutorial leverage.
Summary and conclusion. The case of United States versus Piccinonna involved Julio Piccinonna, who was convicted of making false statements to a grand jury. The key issue was the admissibility of polygraph evidence. The Court of Appeals ultimately held that the per se rule excluding such evidence could be reconsidered under certain conditions. And here is the summary of the case and its conclusion. Case background. The defendant is Julio Piccinonna, and the charges are making false material statements to a grand jury in violation of Title IV of the Organized Crime Control Act of 1970. The context is Piccinonna was compelled to testify before a grand jury investigating antitrust violations in the waste disposal business in South Florida. The key legal issues. Polygraph evidence. The primary focus of the case was whether polygraph test results could be admitted as evidence in court. The previous rulings, historically, polygraph evidence was excluded under a per se rule due to concerns about its reliability and the potential for jury prejudice. Court's findings. Reevaluation of polygraph evidence. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals found that advances in polygraph technology warranted a reevaluation of the exclusionary rule. New standards for admissibility. Stipulations. Polygraph evidence may be admitted if both parties stipulates to its admissibility in advance, including the circumstances of the test and the scope of its use. Impeachment or corroboration. Polygraph results can also be used to impeach or corroborate witness testimony, provided certain conditions are met. Adequate notice must be given to the opposing party, and the opposing party must have the opportunity to conduct a similar test. The evidence must comply with the federal rules of evidence. For conclusion, judgment. The court vacated Piccinonna's conviction and remanded the case for further proceedings, allowing the trial court to reconsider the admissibility of the polygraph evidence based on the new standards established. Significance. This case marked a significant shift in the treatment of polygraph evidence in the 11th Circuit, recognizing its potential utility while still imposing strict conditions in order to mitigate risk or unfair prejudice.
Thank you.